one more? Great questions. Why should gifted kids have all the fun? You've heard of the gifted kid child to burned out adult pipeline. Now get ready for the below average child to the already given up adult pipeline. So, here on the channel, we tend to talk a lot about gifted kids. But what we don't talk about is fun gifted kids. We don't talk about people who are below average. And I've worked with a lot of people who are below average, especially in terms of IQ. Right? So one of the cool things about being a psychiatrist is you work with people who have things like diagnoses of developmental delay. You work with people who have diagnoses of like intellectual disability. You work with people who have diagnoses of schizophrenia, which can lead to cognitive problems over time, like a cognitive decline over time. You work with people like I've had patients, it's super cool, so I'm so grateful. I've like trained at Mass General in McLean. And the cool thing is like people with weird conditions from all over the world fly across the world to be treated at these institutions. So I've even worked with people with things like Williams syndrome. Fascinating condition. So Williams syndrome is a chromosomal abnormality that results in a couple of interesting features. So there's some amount of intellectual disability. Their brains are different in a way to where they have no fear of like strangers. So they're incredibly friendly with everyone. They're the nicest people on the planet. They have no conception that like you're gonna hurt them in some way. So we all have like this circuit in our brain that causes us to like pull back a little bit. They don't have that. The other really fascinating thing about Williams syndrome is somehow this constellation of things also results in some people with Williams syndrome with perfect pitch. So they're musical savants. You can play, like, without any training, you can play a particular key and they can, like, tell you what it is. It's weird. Brain is cool. So if you're someone who's below average IQ, has developmental delay, oftentimes what happens is you do poorly early in life, and then you have this destiny that is laid out for you, right? Because the smart kids do well. And if you do well in school, then you go to a good college. And if you go to a good college, you get a good job. And if you get a good job, you make a lot of money. If you make a lot of money, you are more attractive on the dating market, you find the right person, and then you have babies, and you go on vacations, and then you surf, and then you buy this car, and then all of this life starts with grades. So, as you start to struggle at the beginning, you are told implicitly and explicitly that you will suck at life. People will literally give you Fs. People will tell you you will go nowhere. People will tell you this is what you need to do to be successful. And then this creates the idea in your mind that you are doomed to failure. Unfortunately, there's something called the nocebo effect. And the nocebo effect is the opposite of the placebo effect. So the placebo effect is, if I believe that this medicine will help me and I take the pill, I will get more help. Belief creates outcomes. The nocebo effect is also the same principle. Belief creates outcomes. But if I believe I am doomed to failure, I will actually fail. It increases the likelihood of failure when you control all other variables. And I see this a lot in the clients and patients that I work with, like especially people who are not necessarily intellectual disability, but I've worked with people with below average IQ, for sure. Right? And they approach a job interview or a promotion opportunity thinking like, oh, I'm going to not do well. I'm going to fail at this. And this creates a greater chance of failure. So there are a couple of things you need to understand if you're someone who's below average intelligence about your success and trajectory. The first thing to understand is that IQ, to a certain degree, correlates with external success and median income, but is not nearly as cut and dry as people think. So the first thing is that if you look at the people who make the top 1% of earners in the world, they are actually not as intelligent as like the top 10%. Okay, this is really interesting. So IQ correlates with income on the whole, but the most successful people are actually not the smartest. It's not that they're not necessarily the smartest. It is literally high IQ tops out at a certain point, and then if you really want to become a top 1% earner, it's not IQ that gets you from 10% to 1%. Now, if you look at what results in success in your job, success in life, it's so much more than IQ. So your EQ matters a lot too. How kind you are, how reliable you are, how much people like you. See, human beings are community organisms. And there are a lot of things that correlate, or there are a lot of things about just being likable and caring about other people and putting your effort in the right direction that is incredibly rewarding. So I remember when I was a third or fourth year medical student, we had a student that rotated with us who was very accomplished. When I was a third or fourth year resident, we had a medical student. So what happens is I did one of these. We have these things called away rotations. So if you want to go to a very competitive program, usually like a top 5 program, what a lot of people will do is you will do an audition rotation. So as a medical student, I did a 1-month audition rotation at Massachusetts General Hospital. So if you look at the top programs in the country, you show up there for a month, you have your application on paper, but then you actually work there for a month and you let them get to know you. And in my case, that worked out. So I landed a spot there. Sometimes, though, what happens is you have these candidates that show up that are so stacked. Their resume is stacked. Excellent test scores, tons of publications, prior experience, good grades. They look like God's gift to earth. And then when the time came around to talk about this person, we were like, hey, what do y'all think about this person? A lot of us had trouble articulating because there's nothing wrong with them. They were very intelligent. They knew a lot of stuff. And so we were having difficulty, none of us were like this person. We couldn't fault them, but none of us were enthusiastic. And that's where Brilliant, one of my attendings, just a fucking brilliant psychiatrist. I won't say their name, but brilliant psychiatrist. She's like, I would not want to teach that person for 4 years. She's annoying. This is what my attending said. I would not want to teach this person for 4 years. She said, I wouldn't want to be on call. I wouldn't want to supervise this person on call. I don't care how smart she is. Right? So it blew my mind just how clear they were with their language, what they understood. This person is annoying. And we're here talking about a meritocracy. Is it okay to not select someone because they're annoying? I think absolutely. Right? Annoying matters a lot in the world. And I love the way that she said that because I was thinking to myself, I don't enjoy teaching her. I don't enjoy it. And when we're really thinking about selecting a group of people who you are going to be in the trenches with, working 80 hours a week, on call for 24 hours, and the shit is hitting the fan, the emergency room is full of people, there's a guy who's high on meth who has just been put into restraints, there's another person who's psychotic. Who do you want to be in the trenches with? It's not necessarily the person who has the best answers. It's the person who is the easiest to work with. It's the person that you can rely on, not the smartest person. One of the most important lessons I learned in residency, be a good person to work with. Right? The big irony is, who knows, I may not be. But you have to ask the people that educate you. So if you're not the smartest person. Understand that there are many ways that you can advance pretty far. And I've seen even medical students who are, in my opinion, probably average or even below average IQ. And they can actually do it. It's hard, right? So their ability to assimilate and analyze information is suboptimal. But the good news is that a lot of being a doctor is not just about knowing the right answer. It's about not being an asshole. And also, I know so many doctors who are so smart, but are so arrogant that they do not listen to the patient. They make judgments based on their brilliance. And I am sure that I've been guilty of this too. Here I am criticizing me. I'm sure I have. I'm sure I've had a day where I was thinking egotistically, where I was annoyed by the patient, where I was having a tough day. And the reason that I know this is because I have made that mistake. That's part of what medical training is. It's a lesson in humility. So now what happens when a patient comes in to say, hey, I think this is wrong with me? I say, okay, cool. Thank you for giving me the answer. It's like, holy shit, this person is living this day in and day out. And if they tell you that this is wrong, you should take it seriously. So if you're someone who's gotten lots of Fs, you're not doomed to failure. You're not destined to nothingness. There are a couple of things that you need to understand. The first thing, life is not a race. And when I work with people who are below average IQ, they tend to move slower, but what ultimately determines where they end up is how long they move, not how fast they move. It took me 5.5 years to graduate from college. It's taken some of the people that I work with 6, but they do graduate. Medical school is not about getting straight A's in your first year. It's about having the core competencies of being a doctor when you graduate. If it takes you 6 years to graduate from college instead of 4 or even 3, you are still qualified to graduate. You meet that minimum threshold. So this is the first thing. There's no harm in going slow. There may be some harm, but there may be some harm, but I think it's not nearly as important as reaching the finish line. Reaching the finish line is the most important thing. So if you need to take time, you take time. I'm a late bloomer. I started med school at 28. I finished residency at 32. I had friends who finished residency at 26. I had friends who were finishing residency when I was still applying to medical school and getting rejected. Life isn't a race. You have to operate on your own timeline. If you try to operate on someone else's timeline, it's silly. Just think about it in any other dimension. Someone else's flight leaves at 5 in the morning. Oh my God, I need to get there by 4. What time does your flight leave? Noon. Silly. Don't play based on someone else's timeline. Ultimately, your value in the world is not how fast you did something, but how well you do something. If it takes you time, it takes you time. It took me time. Second thing, focus on the things that may not be IQ related that absolutely matter. Dependency, kindness, reliability, altruism. Human beings are community creatures. The world needs good generals and good soldiers. I personally do not think there's any shame in being a good soldier. I'm happy to be I've been a good soldier in my life. I'm happy to continue to be a good soldier. And arguably, I'm a good soldier today. I have a boss who's a CEO who tells me to do certain things, and then I do those things. I have some leadership in this organization, but one of the most important things that we ever did for HG is me stepping down as CEO. This is bigger than Dr. K. So there's no shame to me. I don't feel ashamed by having a boss. I don't need to be the leader. And the cool thing is that your F's when you're growing up don't determine your success later. This is the other really important thing that's important about development. So if you get F's in the 3rd grade, you may just be developing slower. This is why we have a diagnosis of developmental delay. It's not developmental stunting, it's delay. So you will get there in the end. And this is the real challenge of being someone who's below average, is that you don't realize that all of these things are not destiny for you. They're not determinant of your future. But the problem is then we start believing that if I get Fs in the 3rd grade, I will get Fs for the rest of my life. If it takes me 5 years to graduate from high school instead of 4, it means I'm an idiot. It becomes deterministic, and then you start believing that. And the real problem is once you believe it, then it becomes destiny. It isn't the Fs that make it destiny. There's an intermediary step. F leads to a lack of hope. Lack of hope leads to destiny. Very important to understand. How do I know this? Because I've worked with these people. Because the data says so. Because the data shows that if you intervene in someone's life, you can alter their trajectory. Right? I recently saw a case report of 2 people on the autism spectrum with very early intervention. Intervention at 20 months. And showed a remission of autism, which I'm somewhat skeptical of. But we absolutely know that with autism spectrum, we can alter the course of the development of autism through early intervention. We have a lot of programs in psychiatry like early intervention psychosis, where we know if someone is psychotic, the earlier you intervene, the better this person does. You can alter the trajectory of life. And what really seals the coffin for these people is their belief that the trajectory cannot be altered. That once you are in this camp, you will be in this camp forever. Not true. So what would I recommend to this person? First of all, take it slow. You can get an F year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. Doesn't mean that you'll get an F for the rest of your life. In my particular case, it was I got Fs in year 1 and year 2. I got Cs, Bs in year 3, year 4 of college. And I got Bs and As in year 5. Then I went to med school, went back to B for year 1 and 2. Bs or Cs. And then I got to years 3 and 4, and I got As. Then I went to residency, and I got As. So past performance is not a predictor of future return. This is what people say about the stock market. And the whole point about being human is that we can alter the trajectory of our lives. The thing that fundamentally makes us human is that we don't have to listen to ourselves. I don't know that a tree can ever become a dancer. I don't know that a lion can ever become vegan. We can enforce veganism on them, but a human being who has a digestive tract that is designed to eat meat, has teeth that are designed to eat meat, can stop eating meat. A human being that wants to hurt another human being can restrain that hurt. A human being, what makes a human being is that we can fight against our nature, that we are not actually predestined. That's what makes us human. We can alter the course of our life. So understand this. Take it slow, number 1. Number 2, your future is not determined. Number 3, get help. Number 4, even if your IQ is not ideal, work on your EQ, work on being a good person, work on being reliable. It will let you rise very, very highly. There may be some partners out there who are sapiosexuals and attracted to intelligence, but most of the people that I know will take reliability, trustworthiness, and kindness over intelligence every day of the week. Yeah, it's like super cool to date someone who's a genius, but half of them are arrogant pricks. And ask my wife. So kindness, compassion, altruism, reliability, empathy. These can help you succeed in your relationship. They can help you succeed in your career. So all is not lost. We have time for 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up for the day. So what do I do if I don't have natural empathy or alexithymia? The same thing that anyone does if they don't have natural anything else. You practice it. I didn't have natural empathy. I was naturally very alexithymic. Okay? This is how I was. And then, I went through training. And I became more empathic. Right? Some of us are not naturally graceful. I wasn't naturally a chef, but I'm, decent at cooking now. So this is the other cool thing about being human. The stats at level 1 are not deterministic for what we are at level 20. The whole point of being human is we get to level up. Right? I know it's such a simple answer. We have tons of resources on alexithymia and empathy and things like that, so I'll refer you to those. There's a lot of good stuff on emotions. We've done lectures on emotions. We have a couple of memberships lectures on emotions. We've got a trauma guide that digs a lot into emotions. So check those resources out. We may have resource packs specifically on emotions, I'm not sure. I'll look into diaspora blues. I like that term. I'm not too familiar with it, but okay, this is a good question. How do you avoid trying too hard before it leads to burnout and not trying at all? I'll try to answer this one quickly, but it's a long one. See, one of the biggest problems that we run into is that we try hard, we try extra hard, and then we burn out. Because we're told, oh my God, you should try harder, you should work harder, right? By people like myself. So how do you avoid the cycle of trying extra hard, burning out, recovering, trying extra hard? So this happens because the trying hard overwhelms some of your internal signals. See, I'll give you all a great example. Or maybe a terrible example. I'll give you all an example. So there's this thing that I call the gamer diet. And the gamer diet is when you're playing games for 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and you suppress your internal hunger signals. When you suppress your internal hunger signals and you finally take a break from gaming, you're famished. And then you order a gigantic pizza and you consume a pizza. And then you go into a food coma. And then you get out of it a couple hours later, you put on some anime, you watch it for 3 hours, and then you recover from your food coma, it's back to the game. So if we look at what propagates unhealthy cycles in our life, it is numbness to our internal signals. Because you say work really hard. You say work extra hard. What I'm saying is, why is there a really or an extra in there? Why can't it just be work hard? Well, because the reason you have to work really hard is because your body is telling you this is enough. Your body is telling you it's time to stop. Your body is telling you we need rest. And you override those signals. This is why you work really hard. Because your body is telling you enough. And then you ignore those signals and then you burn out. So many years ago, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And Mount Kilimanjaro is pretty cool. So what you do is you wake up at midnight and you start the last day hiking at midnight. Why? So that you can see dawn from the top of the mountain at 6 a.m. So I started hiking at midnight. Got to the top around 7:30 because I was having trouble. Hung out there for 10 or 15 minutes. You can't really hang out at the top of the mountain. It's too cold. And then I started on my way down. And then I was so excited, so thrilled. And people told us, yeah, you have to hike kind of halfway down the mountain, and then you'll spend the day there. You'll get back to the halfway point at noon. You spend the day there, and then you hike back the rest of the way. And I'm like, how much hiking do we do the rest of the way? They're like, oh, it's about 6 hours, 8 hours, because going down is way easier. I was like, screw that, let's just keep going. Why stop at noon? I can walk downhill for another 6 or 8 hours. So, stupid me, started hiking at midnight, took a 2-hour break at noon, and started down the mountain at 2 p.m. After 8 hours, I was a mess. First thing that I did was pull a muscle in my ass. Then I was limping. Did I stop? No. Next thing that I did was pull a muscle in my contralateral knee. Actually, probably tore a tendon, which is still an injury I have to this day. Did I stop then? No. Kept going. Next thing that I did is pull a muscle in the other ass. Hiked for, what is that? 7.5 hours with another 4, and then another 8 or 9. Hiked like 20 hours in one day. Fucking dumb. And my body paid the price. When you ignore the signals that your body or your brain or your mind send you, you will burn out. You will get injured. So how do we avoid the cycle of working really hard and burning out? We pay attention to what our signals are telling us about slowing down. The second thing that's really important, why don't we pay attention to those signals? Because something else is driving us. That's what we need to understand. What is driving you to ignore the signals? So in the case of working really hard and burning out, I'll give you all one really good example, right? So I work with people, they're burnt out, they're out of work for 3 months, now they have to catch up. Now I'm behind. It is the sense of behind that causes me to work twice as hard. Ignore when I should slow down. See, after you've been out of work for a while, you can't go back to 150%. You should start at 50%, then 70%, then 90%. Work your way up. Go slower, not faster. Catching up involves going slower. So back when I was at MGH, I worked with patients from the concussion clinic. So these are people who have concussions. And they're already 6 months behind. People with a head injury and a coma. They missed a year of school. When they go back to school, we don't tell them, hey, buddy, you missed a year of school. You need to take twice as many classes. It's the opposite. You're going to take 2 classes the first semester instead of 5. If you do okay there, you're going to take 3 classes the next semester. If you're okay there, you can take 2 classes in the summer, catch up a little bit. Then you could take a full course load the next year. You'll still be a little bit behind. Then you take a full course load the semester after that. This is the way you catch up in life, not by working harder. Not by making up for lost time. I don't know how to say this to y'all. Once time is gone, it's gone. Can't ever get it back. Don't try to make it up. Done, finished, behind you. Your attempts to reclaim time from the past will cause you to screw your present, ruin your future. This is what happens when we burn out and we fall behind. Take a lesson from evidence-based concussion treatment. Go slow. The time's gone. GG. But what difference does it make? It took you 5.5 years or 6 years to finish college instead of 4. You're a little bit behind, but then what? You finish college, you're going to work for 40 years either way. Oh, you're going to just work for 38? You can make up for it later. This is all an illusion of the mind. Second reason that we work really hard because we burn out. Not just catching up, we want to impress people. Now here's the problem with impressing people. If they are not impressed, what do? We work even harder. We're shooting for being impressed, other people being impressed with us. Now what we're doing is letting our well-being rely on the sensory availability of someone else. What if the reason they're not impressed is because they're going through a divorce? So they don't have the emotional bandwidth to say, good job, kid. There's so many variables that result in someone being impressed or not impressed. And we're relying on this, we're coveting this, we're craving this, we're flagellating ourselves in order to accomplish this thing to impress someone. Third reason we burn ourselves out and work really hard, because we need to prove something to ourselves. I don't have faith in myself. If I'm at the top of my class, then I will be good. Then I will be content. We tie our own ego, our own sense of well-being to some kind of external thing. This is a match made in hell. Because on the one hand, you You can work the hardest you can possibly work and still not end up at the top of your class because maybe someone worked a little bit harder, maybe someone cheated a little bit more, maybe someone is a little bit smarter than you, maybe someone has a background in the subject, maybe just because of random chance. You spent, out of 100 things that you were studying, you focused on 90, they focused on a different 90. The 90 that they focused on showed up more on the test. GG. Now you're going to let your work ethic, your self-esteem, be the result, be dependent on randomness? GG. People will oftentimes flagellate themselves, work really hard. I see this in banking, I see this in medicine. It's adaptive. It allows people to succeed. But it's toxic. We've talked about toxic here before. So if you want to get out of the cycle of working really hard and then burning out, what you need to pay attention to is, first of all, pay attention to the signals telling you to slow down. And even if you notice the signals telling you to slow down, I would say 75% of the people that I've worked with notice the signals. They just don't care. Something else matters to them more. And as long as that thing matters to you more, you are going to cannibalize yourself. You have to change what matters to you. And I've seen this as well with, like, patients in banking who are in their 50s, who do way too much cocaine. They've been doing cocaine for 30 years because they're in banking, and that's what people in banking do. Work hard, play hard. Problem is, now you're in your 50s. Your myocardial tissue cannot handle the levels of cocaine that you used to use 20 years ago, so you have a heart attack. And then you wind up in the hospital, where a cardiologist is taking care of you. And a cardiologist realizes, oh shit, this person tested positive for cocaine. Let's get psychiatry involved. And then they call my ass. And then you go and you work with this person. And then what do you see? You see someone who ignores their signals. And then you ask them why, and it's because they value something else. And then I have to do the work of trying to get them to recalibrate their value system. Right? It's fun work. I love it. And I can't do it for them. They have to ultimately decide. So burnout is most often driven by you. Technically, it's an intersection between you and the workplace. That's what the research shows, but you have a component. So that's the one that we're going to work on. When I go and I work with a company, we address the company side stuff. Okay? So the more you understand yourself, the more you recognize your signals, and the more you look at why you are ignoring those signals, this is when you will truly be better. All right, y'all. That's all the time we have for today. I know we didn't cover quite as many. Huge thank you to our team for putting together the posts, whether it was TechTeller or Merck or who did it, I'm not sure. I know we didn't get to everything, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. Maybe we'll get to it next time. Thank you all very much for coming today. It's fun to be back from vacation. We also really appreciate, we talked about the board stuff at the beginning. I'm sure it'll come up again. I just want to reiterate once again that I think this is how things are supposed to happen. Right? Got reprimanded by the medical board. That's the job of the medical board. They had an investigation. We cooperated. Thankfully, their reprimand does not come with a fine, a probation, no restrictions on my license. More importantly, no restrictions or changes to the content that we make or the work that I do online. So that's great. So practically, this doesn't change what I do day in and day out. I don't think y'all will see many changes here because we don't need to change anything. Say we need to change anything. Grateful to everyone who's provided us with feedback. Grateful to our scientific advisory board. Grateful to all the people internally at HG who do develop our processes and procedures of onboarding to make sure that things are safe and boundaried and whatever. And we will continue to improve. Because the work that we're doing here, we believe is important. And thankfully, we're allowed to continue to do this work in an unrestricted way. So I think the board process was super fair. I think that's why we have institutions like medical boards. I think they're doing their job. I think we're going to do our job. And we are going to do the best that we can to try to tackle this mental health crisis in whatever small way we can do it. And we're going to do it for y'all, because y'all are worth it. And so thank you all very much for your support over the last 4 or 5 years. Crazy. This has been going on for 5 years now, right? We'll be doing it for a couple more years, at a minimum, I hope. But we never know what tomorrow brings. So thank you all very much. It's an absolute privilege to be able to do this work. It's a privilege to be able to call this work. It's not always fun, but it is an absolute honor, and I'm grateful to y'all. And we'll see y'all, I don't know what's next. When are we back? Okay, so we have a members Q&A on Monday, and then we have a deep dive into autism spectrum, I believe, scheduled for next Friday. So we're going to do a deep dive into autism next week. So we hope to see y'all there. Thank y'all.
Készülj fel az eddigi legmerészebb, legszínesebb nyaradra a Schwarzkopf-Line egyedi színeivel.
This is super scary. 50% of men who kill themselves have no history or evidence of mental illness. What causes people to kill themselves is they try to connect with others and they get rejected. I can feel the hurt. I can feel the loss.
Dr. Alo Pinogia. He's a psychiatrist, Harvard Medical School instructor, real-life monk who uses his own addictive past
To help millions of people improve their own mental health.
Everyone is getting screwed, but there's a crisis. People telling us that being a man means that you're toxic, that there's patriarchy, that your testosterone level makes you violent. So men are struggling right now, and the rest of the world says, no, you're not. You're privileged. And these people have been literally killing themselves because no one has been listening to them. Except there's one group of people who says your life sucks. And that's these toxic masculine. And these guys say, I will show you a way to make it better. And that's when things go. And this, by the way, is how people wind up with addiction. Because when you look at addiction, what happens is we use a substance or a technology as an antidote to pain. So I've worked with people who have pornography addiction, for example, that will have work on one screen, and they will literally have pornography on the second screen.
You're joking.
No, very common. And this is where there's a big problem in the world today.
Now you've got this young generation of women as well that are exploding in their suicidality. Loneliness seems to be getting worse and worse. What is the remedy to this?
So this is something that's very important to understand. Everyone who's listening to this podcast needs to...
It's absolutely crazy to me that so many of you have decided to watch our show, and so many of you have decided to subscribe to our show. We now have 5 million subscribers on YouTube, which is a number that I just can't comprehend, and it's a dream that I absolutely never could have had. We started the Diary of a CEO just over 3 years ago now, and in my wildest expectations, we might have had 100,000 subscribers by now. So you can imagine how shocked I am that so many of you have chosen to tune into these conversations every week and spend some time with us. So thank you. And I made a deal with you. I made a deal that if you subscribe to this show, that we would continue to raise the bar. And in 2024, we're going to raise the bar like never before. I've been working for the last 9 months on a surprise for all of you that have subscribed to the show, and I'm very excited to deliver that for you. The production's going to change. We're going to go even further with our guests, and we're going to tell even more global stories. So as always, if you appreciate what we're doing here, the simple, free favour I'll ask from you is to hit the subscribe button. Let's get on with the episode. Dr. Kane, with all of your work and all of the content you've produced, if someone's just clicked on this podcast now, what do you think they're going to get out of this conversation? What do you think they're going to walk away with?
I hope what they'll walk away with is the realization that you are the instrument of your life. And understanding that fundamental instrument that you use to live your life, your body, your mind, will ultimately help you accomplish whatever you want.
And what is the opposite mindset to that? To understanding that you're the instrument of your life? What is the typical mindset that people have that go through their lives without the realization that they are the instrument of their life?
I think it's assuming that something outside of them will fix things inside of them, right? So people will think like, okay, if I get a promotion, then I'll be happy. if I date this person, then I will be happy. If I have this amount of money, I will be happy. Everyone assumes that external things outside of you will fix things inside of you.
Why is this subject close to home for you?
Because I used to believe that. So I struggled a lot. I mean, I'm by all definitions of the word an absolute failure. I failed out of college, was finished school at the age of 35 or 36. You know, it took me a long time to kind of get on my feet and figure out what I was doing in my life. And I realized that, like, the reason that I was screwing up so much is because I always thought that accomplishing something outside of me or achieving some kind of goal would make me happy. And I didn't understand that all of my problems came from me. I also blamed all kinds of things outside of me. So I would blame circumstances. I would blame my professor is biased. This girl is, you know, she doesn't see the goodness that I have in me. She can't recognize how awesome I am. So I kept on blaming things outside of me instead of accepting responsibility.
Take me from that point onwards. So what happened that brings you to sit here today as an accomplished individual, as a doctor, and so on?
So I think my journey starts with failure. So I think we think about failure as a negative thing, but I think that that's what actually got me started on my journey. After failing out of college, I went to India, and I stayed in a monastery or ashram for about 3 months, and it completely changed the way that I looked at the world. So what I sort of realized is that, kind of like what I was saying, is that, see, I had assumed that things outside of me were responsible for things inside of me. So as a simple example, I attached my sense of self-worth to getting an A. So when I went to college, I was planning on becoming a doctor, and as any Indian kid wants to do, I wanted to go to Harvard. And so I had sort of all these grand dreams of what I wanted to accomplish in life and how I wanted to be a good force in the world and all this kind of stuff. It's all ego. And so what sort of happened is, even though I wanted all of these things, I assumed that all of that accomplishment would bring me happiness. It's when I went to India that I sort of discovered that, like, no amount of external accomplishment will bring you lasting happiness. And this is what we sort of see. These are the people that I work with now. You know, I'll work with someone like a banker or a doctor or a content creator. And for all of these people, it's like once you accomplish your goal, your mind moves the goalposts. So you got promoted to vice president, now you need to be director, then you need to be managing director, then you need to be, you know, there's always more. The mind always wants more. So chasing after all of that will never lead to lasting happiness. So once I sort of started to realize that, I kind of gave up all of my desires for accomplishment. And the real paradox there is that as I let go of all of my goals, I started to become more successful. And so instead of trying to be something great, I just focused on, you know, small targets. I sort of focused on my spiritual practice. I tried to become a monk and take vows at the age of like 22, and my teachers rejected me. So I said, I'm ready to forsake my life. And they said, you have nothing worth giving up. Your life is meaningless. Like, you have nothing worth giving up. So go back to the United States, rise as high as you can, finish a doctoral degree, actually get something worth giving up. And then at the age of 30, if you still want to take vows, we'll take you.
What situation must you have been in at that point, though, before you went off at sort of 21 years old to that ashram to be so prepared to give everything up? Because I heard that, reading through your story, that you had addictive behaviors at that point already.
Yeah, so I struggled a lot with video game addiction. So I started playing video games when I was very young. And then in high school, it really started to impact my grades. In college, I was basically playing video games all day long instead of like going to class and stuff like that. Like, I remember waking up the morning of my Spanish final. So this is my final exam. And then realizing that I like wasn't very prepared for it. So I just turned off my alarm clock and went back to sleep, and therefore guaranteed failure. And so where I was mentally was just in a really bad place. So I had all of these goals and aspirations, and I was so frustrated with myself that I couldn't bring myself to do what I wanted. Right? So I knew that I had to study more. Every single day I would wake up and be like, I have to study more. I have to catch up. I've fallen behind. And so I'd have all of these thoughts, and no matter how much I wanted something, it seemed like my body or my brain would just not listen to me. It wanted the video game more. It wanted something else more. And so what I really was I had no control over my life. I was probably depressed. If I had seen a psychiatrist, I'm sure I would have gotten diagnosed with something. Brief periods of suicidality, basically waking up at noon every day, playing video games all day long. And I also remember, like, before I had to play to the point of absolute exhaustion. Because if I put my head on the pillow and I did not pass out, all of the thoughts that I was keeping at bay with the video games would come rushing back about how I'm ruining my life day after day after day after day. And I was just sort of sinking deeper and deeper and, like, falling into a pit that I could not climb out of.
So the ashram in India tells you that you can't give up your life. What happened then? And why did you specialize in psychiatry?
So when I went to med school, I mean, when I was in med school, I still had ego. So, I mean, I still have ego now, but so I was going to like combine Eastern medicine and sort of focus on evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine. And I was going to be an oncologist and be a real doctor and save lives. But what I really found is that in med school, a couple of things. One is my favorite organ was the mind. So what I fell in love with in India was the mind and sort of the internal sense of self and all this kind of stuff. So I really liked that. And then I think that my people were in psychiatry. So the other thing that happened is I was trying to decide between internal medicine and oncology and psychiatry. And so one of my mentors in med school told me, like, do this. So do 1 month of each and then just ask yourself, which one do you enjoy more? So on the one hand, when I was thinking about oncology, this was also chasing a desire, right? I had this idea that I wanted to be a real doctor, right? Because those are like, I want to cure cancer. Like, that's like, let's be like a real solid doctor and do that. And then what I noticed was that now what internal medicine has become is very like sitting in front of a computer. So when you work in a hospital, like 8 hours of the day, I'm sitting in front of a computer and you spend very little time with your patients. And then over time, I started to realize that, like, psychiatry is the only field of medicine that we're losing the war in. So if you look at medical outcomes for things like bypass surgery and stuff like that, those are really good. This is really insane to really think about. So we can take your body, Stephen, and we can give you a heart from a different human being. We can give you a kidney from a different human being. We can give you a liver from a different human being. If you have a part of your body that doesn't work, we can literally rip it out of you, stick in a new one, and you will survive. So outcomes in every field of medicine are improving except for mental health. So mental health is the one area where addictions are getting worse, depression is getting worse, suicidality is getting worse, and this is in spite of advances in neuroscience. So something has happened where we've missed something about the mind, and everyone is getting sicker. So, like, this was the problem that really attracted me. And this isn't about my desire. This is sort of where we introduce a concept of dharma or duty. So I recognize that I'm lucky. I'm this kid who got to spend 7 years studying to become a monk in India. So I travel back and forth, but I spent my summers there. So I had this really unique perspective. And then I got to train at Harvard Medical School. And what am I supposed to do with this knowledge, right? Like, this is 15 years that I've devoted to understanding how human beings work. And, like, I had this very kind of, chic private practice in Boston where I worked with very, very successful people and helped them achieve. And then I sort of realized, like, that's not what I'm here for, right? So I've gotten 15 years to learn all of this stuff, and, like, there's no shortage of people lining up to help CEOs with their mental health. There's absolutely a shortage of people helping 25-year-old incels who are, like, on the internet, who everyone wants to throw in jail because they're very hateful and misogynistic and things like that. So I sort of realized that, like, okay, like, this is what I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to do it.
Okay, so I've got a big question, but before just to tee up that big question, you said you had this practice in Boston where you were working with sort of high-profile individuals, etc. What is the full spectrum of individuals that you've spent time working with on a one-on-one basis or through your practice?
I worked with people out of MIT, incubators, CEOs, entrepreneurs, things like that. So a lot of high-performance people. But then I've also worked with, like, losers, let's say. So this is also more intensely. This is everything from 25-year-old kid who's living in his mom's basement playing video games all day to people who are even homeless. So I worked with, like, basically, like, the whole spectrum. And, yeah.
You used the word losers there. You did little air quotes for anyone that can't see you right now. I'm really interested when you talked about incels as well, whether the way society is and the way that we're heading in terms of clarity over what it is to be a man has had any impact on those people that you refer to as incels. Like, because we now have this digital world that we can live our lives in as a distraction from the real world, and there's now more confusion than ever over what it is to be a man and the role of a man in a, and then we look at the stats around suicidality, and I think in Europe the biggest killer of men at the age of 45 is themselves currently. Is the shifting idea of what it is to be a man having an impact on people's sense of self and their purpose?
100%. So there's a crisis that's going on in men, and people think that this is new, but I don't think it's new. It's always been there. So if you look at even 50, 60 years ago, 80% of suicides are still going to be men. So historically, men have been killing themselves for 100 years, and no one's been paying attention. We're just noticing now because the problem seems to be getting worse. So there's a couple of things that are really interesting to understand. So one is that if we look at what technology is doing to our brains, the first thing that it's doing is it is externalizing our attention. So if you look back, let's say 1,000 years ago, as human beings, we spent a lot more time with ourselves. So let's say that you and I go out hunting, and then let's say you shoot an arrow at a deer and you miss, and then I shoot an arrow at a deer and I hit. So in this moment, I'm superior to you. And then we pick up the deer and we're carrying it back, and then we have about 2 or 3 hours to take that emotional insult and we kind of process it. We just give our mind space to process it, which it does automatically. Now, if you look at what happens in people's days, they don't actually have any time to process what happens to them because we are so constantly distracted by external things. So I don't know if you're like this, but I was in this point where I was idiotically efficient. So I would wake up in the morning and I would listen to a podcast while I'm doing my exercise or whatever. And then even when I'm cooking, I'm listening to a lecture. And then when I'm walking to the train, I have earbuds in and I'm listening to a lecture there. On the train, I'm reading. I wanted my life to be completely efficient. I didn't want to waste a single moment.
I literally listen to the news in the shower. It's
right. So we don't want to waste time. And so if you really think about it, where's the attention of your mind? Your mind is pointed outside of you. And so then what happens is once we do not pay attention to ourselves, we lose sight of our internal signals. Literally in the same way that if you raise a child in a dark cave, the photoreceptors in their eyes won't develop. They will atrophy. So anything that the mind does not get access to will start to atrophy. If I don't practice Spanish, I'm going to forget Spanish. The brain is very efficient at working. So as we externalize our attention, we lose sight of our internal signals. We don't know who we are anymore. And now if I don't know who I am, how do I figure out who I'm supposed to be? I pay attention to the outside. Where are the answers? They're on the outside. So this person is talking about masculinity. This person is talking about what it means to be a man. This person is talking about what it means to be a man. And now since I don't have any internal source of information, I'm trying to figure out what it means to be a man from the outside world. And this is when men get truly fucked. Because what it means to be a man, we are getting all kinds of mixed signals. So on the one hand, it means being physically fit. On the other hand, it means being a provider. On one hand, it means having sex with as many women as you can find. On the other hand, it means having sex with just one woman and being a really solid man and being a good father. And then there's also people telling us that being a man means that you're shit, right? That you're toxic, that your testosterone level makes you violent, that you're evil, that you're privileged, that there's a patriarchy, all this kind of stuff. So we're getting all this information from the outside about what it means to be a man. And so there are all kinds of interesting ramifications of this. So men in today's society are not allowed to complain. So if you complain and you're a successful person or a privileged person, everyone is going to think you're arrogant. Everyone is going to think, oh my God, who's this fucking guy? This guy doesn't know what my life is like. How does he have any right to complain? And even your mind will tell you this. You'll look at these people and you'll be like, yeah, I don't have a right to complain. But now we need to stop for a second and think about what it does to your psychology when you as a human being are not allowed to articulate your suffering. I've worked with people who've grown up in abusive households where children will say to their parents, Mommy, Daddy, I'm hurting. And the parent smacks them across the face. How dare you? You're so lucky. You don't realize the sacrifices I made for you. It's traumatizing to the child when they say, I am suffering and no one listens. This is what we're doing to the generation of men. People are saying, I am suffering. For 100 years, men have been killing themselves. 80% of suicides are men. The most dangerous thing for a man under 45 is themselves. And these people have been literally killing themselves because no one has been listening to them. So in the same way that you grow up with as a child in a household that's abusive, where no one takes you seriously, no one listens to your suffering, and now we even have successful men who are not allowed to complain. So the psychological impact is the same. Anytime you have a human being who is suffering in some way and they cannot find connection with another human being, they cannot find compassion with another human being, that person is going to feel isolated. And if you look at the statistics on suicide, it's very interesting. So the number one thing that correlates with male suicide is not depression. This is super scary. There's one study I saw recently that suggests that 50% of men who kill themselves have no history or evidence of mental illness. And this, I believe the statistic in my clinical practice because I know what depression looks like. I know what bipolar disorder looks like. And half the men that I work with, at least, are not actually mentally ill. See, mental illness means a pathology of the mind, which means that the mind is malfunctioning. Most of the suicidal men that I work with, their mind isn't malfunctioning. They genuinely have a life that is no longer worth living. They're looking at things and objectively realizing that there's no way out of the situation. So they turn to suicide. So I know it's kind of like a very controversial statement, but I think that's what my clinical practice has shown, and there's some research to even back that up. So if we sort of look at what's going on with men, we're sort of, they have nowhere to turn to, and the number one thing that correlates with it is not mental illness, but is a sense of thwarted belongingness. So this is kind of like multivariate regression analysis. But basically what happens is what causes people to kill themselves is they try to connect with others and they get rejected. So it's specifically a very specific research term called thwarted belongingness. So I try to belong to a group, and that group, or multiple groups usually, will thwart my attempts to join the tribe, to join the community. And this is what actually correlates a lot with suicidality. So what's going on with men right now is that we really don't allow them to suffer, because then you're not manly. And we're so externalized with our attention that we're not connecting with ourselves. And so we're looking to other people to tell us what it means to be a man. But that may or may not work for you, right? That may have been what worked for them. So then we kind of get into this problem where we're disconnected from ourselves, and then the world doesn't accept us, we're not allowed to suffer, and that's what creates the problem.
What is the remedy to this?
So I think the first thing is we must reconnect with ourselves, right? So when you're kind of saying, why does everyone think, oh, I need to achieve this, I need to make this money and things like that. Where did you learn that you should do all that? You learned all that from the outside.
Instagram,
right? So we get fed all of these ideas because if you look at all these influencers, what are they doing? They're never crying. They're smiling. Some of them will even pay very attractive women to take pictures with them.
Well, some of them are crying, but they're crying and uploading it for ulterior motives, right?
Absolutely, and I think a lot of them are genuinely suffering too. But then it's also there's all kinds of weird stuff going on. So one thing is people say that men, we don't allow men to be emotional. Nowadays, but people say, oh, men are allowed to cry. So this is something that I experienced even in my marriage, where we allow men to cry, but we don't allow men to be angry. But why are men no longer allowed to be angry? Just think about it for a second. So anger is just a completely normal emotion, right? But if I'm in a situation where I'm in an argument with my wife, and I feel emotion A, and I express emotion A, and she feels emotion B, and she expresses emotion B, these two things should be equal, right? We as both human beings get to express what we feel. Now, in the case of me expressing anger and her expressing sadness, she's crying and I'm yelling. Suddenly, I become a villain.
It's so interesting. I saw a viral tweet yesterday. It was someone Googling, my wife is yelling at me, what should I do? And then my husband is yelling at me, what should I do? When they Googled, my husband is yelling at me, what should I do? Domestic violence helpline comes up as a Google pop-up. When you Google, my wife is yelling at me, what should I do? Nothing comes up.
Yeah.
Because obviously, as you said, in the case of villainization, I know that most domestic violence comes from men, but it's interesting that we see the emotion, we interpret the emotions entirely differently because of that.
Absolutely, right? So we as a society will say oh, men need to be in touch with their emotions, but not anger. And then this is what really screws men, because as men, we are socialized and conditioned to only feel anger. This is the only emotion you are allowed to feel as a man growing up. And this is the one emotion that gets demonized when you're older. So I'll give you a simple example. So, like, I used to get bullied a lot, right? So when I get bullied in school, like, what am I supposed to do, Stephen?
In school, well, it depends if you can fight back.
Absolutely, right? It's fighting back. Like, you didn't say talk to the teacher. You didn't say ask for help. You didn't say cry about it, because if I cry about it, what's going to happen, Stephen?
You're gonna get bullied more.
Absolutely. So we turn every emotion. So men experience anger as something called an umbrella emotion. We literally suppress and are conditioned to suppress all other emotions except for anger. And then if you talk to men about their experience of life, anger is always the first thing that comes out of their mouth. Someone breaks up with you, how do you feel about it? Do you feel ashamed? No, that's not what we say. I feel pissed off. How could she do this to me? And then we vent that anger on the internet, and then this turns into misogyny, right? And then we get demonized for it. And it's not that there isn't, we should be harshly judged if we act on those kinds of emotions. I'm not saying that that's the case. But what we also need to consider is that the men who are saying these kinds of toxic things are saying that for a reason. This is because of their upbringing. This is because of the world that they lived in, right? So we're conditioned to only experience anger. Even sadness gets turned into anger. Shame gets turned into anger. Fear gets turned into anger, right? So if I'm afraid of something happening, what do I need to do? Man up. Get angry, right? Let's go, son. Let's go. This is the emotion that we tap into to overcome fear. So we don't feel any of those other emotions, and we're left only feeling anger.
At the very heart of aggression, I had someone say to me once that at the very heart of aggression is some kind of insecurity. But for men, when they encounter that insecurity, they only know how to sort of manifest it as aggression.
So I wouldn't agree with the first thing, that at the heart of all anger is insecurity, but I would absolutely agree with the second thing, that the only way we know how to respond is with anger. Because
here's the exact quote, I just found it. The source of aggression is insecurity. As we are unconsciously aware that our position in life is never secure, people feel increasingly insecure and helpless, so they will be increasingly aggressive and confrontational at a personal and a social level.
So let's tunnel down into that for a second. Okay, so I think that that is true on some level, but also I would disagree. So the first thing is that we have parts of our brain, even animals feel anger. But I think that, like, when two dogs are fighting over territory, I don't think that that's born of some kind of identity of insecurity, right? So if we really look at, like, the evolutionary purpose of anger, this is my opinion, is that anger is the emotion that we feel to protect our territory. It's a protective emotion. So if I slap you across the face, what's the first thing that you're going to feel? It's going to be anger. So if I insult you, you're going to feel angry. It's fascinating the way that it works. So anger causes our thoughts to be faster. Anger causes our peripheral vision to collapse to 30 degrees. So I only see what's in front of me. And it also makes me less sensitive to pain. So, like, my nociceptors will actually, like, start to be suppressed when I feel angry, right? So if I get into a fight, I'm going to feel it tomorrow, but, like, while I'm getting hit, I'm not going to feel it. So I don't think it's born of all insecurity. I think anger is simply an evolutionary response. It's something that we experience to protect ourselves. That's why we feel angry, right? So if I attack baby bear, mama bear is going to come out angry. So it's really a protective emotion. Now, I agree with the second part of the statement 100%, that when we feel insecure, especially as men, the only way we are taught to deal with our problems is through anger. Right? So if I'm feeling insecure, if I'm feeling ashamed of myself, if someone's bullying me, what do? I put them in their place. Right? I don't try to make peace. I don't complain to someone because no one's going to take me seriously. Right? I have to stand up for myself.
So we've got the first point there about how we remedy this challenge, which is about self-expression or self-expression. That's what I heard.
Not self-expression, introspection.
Introspection, getting to know ourselves.
Right? So it's very simple. So if you look at your idea of what it means to be a man, what percentage of that idea comes outside of you? And what percentage of that idea comes from within you?
About 90% comes from outside of me.
And that's why 90% of people, we're 90% fucked. Right? So, and if you look at, I'm sure you know this, and you've probably done this too, if you look at where is the goodness in your life, where does it come from, Stephen? It doesn't come from what other people have told you. They may have told you something, but then you looked within yourself, and then you found that to be true.
Yeah.
The goodness in you, the motivation, the really good motivation in you, not chasing things, but the duty that you have, everything that you really strive for, all that good stuff comes from inside you. And the problem is that we live in a world that pulls our attention away from ourselves.
What do you think of Andrew Tatism then?
So as a general rule, I don't comment on people that I don't speak to. So tell me the features of what you're talking about.
Okay, so the recent wave of internet masculine influencers who have like Bugattis and lots of women and sports cars, and there's many of them. There's many of them, and they seem to be resonant for some kind of reason. That are kind of saying that the way to be a man is to have loads of money, lots of women, these kind of cars, physical strength, and there's just this huge sort of generation of young, typically men, that are now disciples of that religion.
Yeah. So I think if you dislike that toxic masculinity, what we need to understand is it's the people who hate that toxic masculinity that are driving these people towards it. So I know this is kind of crazy. So what's happened is this has grown, right? And as it's grown, what have we done? We've demonized these people. We've said these people are bad. And as we demonize them, what's happened? They've grown stronger. So this is something that's very important to understand. If you were a man and you say, I am suffering today, what is the response that you're going to get?
Shut up.
Absolutely.
Not in those exact words, but that's whatever the words are, that's what they mean.
Now, I want us to be very, very careful, right? So if you are listening to Steven say people tell you to shut up, and your first thought as a listener is, no, that's not true, that's the problem. So if people agree with you, they understand what you're saying, but if they disagree with you, that's the problem. We literally have a man who is telling us right now that your experiences when I say I'm suffering, people tell you to shut up. And then people are going to be judging you for saying that, and they're going to be saying, no, that's not true.
They're going to be saying, shut up.
Absolutely. Right? So this is exactly the problem. So men are struggling right now, and the rest of the world says, no, you're not. You're privileged. You're a man. There's a patriarchy. And I'm not commenting on the sociology of it. There is a patriarchy, whatever. Men have many advantages in life. I've experienced many advantages of being a man. It's absolutely true. Let's not go there. I'm talking about the individual experience of men. So there's one group of people on the planet who says, yes, your life does suck. And that's these toxic masculine people. They're the only people that truly validate men's experiences. Because everyone else says, why are you complaining? And these guys say, yeah, you're a fucking loser. What are you going to do about it? They at least meet you where you're at. And they say, yes, your life is hard, and I will show you a way to make it better. Whereas the rest of the world says, no, your life isn't hard. What are you complaining about? And I've seen this as a doctor. I've seen patients who are complaining about pain. Women who are complaining about pain because they have an internal bleed within the wall of their uterus that cannot get detected. And they're saying, I'm hurting, I'm hurting, I'm hurting, and we ignore this person's pain. And that's when things go bad. So for years and years and years, we've ignored the struggles of these people. And there's one group on the planet who accepts them with open arms. And the more that we demonize them, so when someone starts believing this toxic masculinity, what is the response? Do people ever ask, like, help me understand what your life is like? Like, what do you like about this person? Because everyone's going to them for a reason, but we never bother to ask, why are you listening to this person? What does this mean to you? We see these posts all the time in our community. My boyfriend is getting into this stuff. My son is getting into this stuff. How do I stop it? Hold on a second. Don't try to stop it. Understand it first. Because everyone's trying to stop it, and no one is bothering to listen to what the experience of these men are. And that's why it's getting worse and worse and worse as we try to stop it.
So if I'm the mother of a son who is watching a lot of these sort of toxic male influences online, what would be a better approach versus just banning the computer and telling them that that's toxic and not to look at it?
Help me understand what you like about this. What is it like to be a man in today's day and age? How do you feel about yourself? How does it feel knowing that 70 to 80% of women want you to make more money than them, and yet 60% of people who graduate from college are women? So men are living in a world today where there are impossible expectations to meet. And so, like, what is it like to be someone who fundamentally has no chance at success? Right? These are the kinds of things that you need to say to these people. You need to give them an alternate place to go where they can be heard and helped, supported, and understood. See, anytime we make a judgment, our mind already has a conclusion. There's nothing left to learn anytime we're judgmental. So what do we do to all these people who are toxic men? We even create the word toxic. We literally label them as bad in some way. And I'm not saying that the behavior isn't toxic, but what I'm trying to point out is that even in our language, there is so much harsh judgment. So I once had a patient.
We both just did it, didn't we?
Absolutely. So I once had a patient who was smearing feces all over the school. So adolescent kid, right? And when you have a kid who's literally taking a shit and wiping it on the walls and stuff, what happens? The kid gets punished. The kid gets punished again and again and again. The one really sad thing is no one ever asks, why are you doing this? What's going on inside you? Because healthy kids don't do this. It's only kids who've been traumatized in some way. And as I've worked with incels, as I've worked with people who are toxically masculine, it always starts with trauma. And when I say always, this is a clinical experience, but I'm talking about 100%. So 100% of people start on this path by getting hurt in some way, by getting taken advantage of in some way, by sacrificing something and not getting something in return. And they have their share of responsibility too. I'm not saying that they're hapless victims, but I think that people who are raised with love and compassion and do have connections don't go down this road.
You're so passionate about this, aren't you? Because I feel like your eyes have seen in your practice some pretty heartbreaking things.
Yeah. I think it's like, see, unless we are willing to be what these people need, they're going to continue going down the toxic masculinity path. Someone needs to start offering these people safe haven. No matter what they say, or not no matter, I think there should be consequences for actions, but so this is as someone who's worked in a jail, right? So and this is what's kind of interesting if you really think about it. People will judge me for talking to or even trying to support people who are toxically masculine. They're like, oh my God, you're such an asshole. You're giving these people a platform. How could you make the world a worse place? And then I tell them I worked in a jail for 3 months. And they're like, oh, look at you. You're so compassionate. You're working with these people who are like criminals. And like, oh my God. I don't think they realize that anyone you see on social media is 10 times better than the people that I work with in jail. These are people who are actual pedophiles, actual rapists, right? Not just talking about it. Maybe the people on social media are too. I don't know. And so it's really interesting the way that our mind automatically judges things. And so if we really want to fix this problem, and I think we need to fix this problem, it's just my take. I mean, I'm not a, I'm a big fan of like compassion and trying to support other human beings. I'm not saying that that's always the right answer. I think sometimes you may need things like war or violence or whatever. I mean, there may be causes for it. But generally speaking, I think that like demonizing these people isn't working.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered in the remedies to this sort of male crisis? We've talked about getting more in touch with yourselves. Is there anything else? Do we need more positive role models, or is it really not about the external at all?
No, I mean, so I think all that stuff is true. So we know that, for example, like there's like a loneliness crisis and things like that. I think that it's not just role models, like we need individual responsibility. So like, for example, everyone will say, yeah, like I know it's a real tragedy that men don't have friends, but it's not my job to fix. I will hear this from both men and women, that like it's a real tragedy, but it's not my responsibility. It's sad that this thing happened, but it's not my and which makes sense, right? No human being is responsible for another human being. But then the question kind of becomes like, okay, let's play that tape through to the end. What happens to that person? Whose responsibility is it? So if you look at a lot of what's going on with men right now, it's loneliness, it's isolation, it's touch starvation, it's suicidality.
Sexlessness as well.
Sexlessness. And it's no individual person's responsibility, but the real problem with this is that these are not problems that men can solve on their own. This is exactly why this is the problem that men are experiencing. Because as men, we are taught to be independent. We are taught to be, you should fix everything on your own. And so men have fixed all of the things that we can fix on our own. The only thing that's left is the things that we must rely on other people for, right? So no one's complaining about, I mean, a lot of men are obese, but there's not like an obesity. There is a crisis, but that's not what's bothering people. That's not where we're losing the war. We're not losing the war on baldness, right? So there are lots of things as a man that you can fix in your own life. It's just the real challenge is that no one is willing to take responsibility for any level of connection with men. And so that's not something that is going to get fixed because you need another human being to hug you. Like you can't hug yourself. It just doesn't work. So my area of focus tends to be on introspection because I think that's like really, really powerful, but there's all kinds of other stuff that's important. Mentorship, role models, all that kind of stuff. But I think ultimately through introspection, you can attain complete peace no matter who you are, what your path is, circumstances. I think it's kind of like the silver bullet, which Elizabeth discovered.
So are you saying there that as a society society, we should take on more of the responsibility for some of these big fundamental issues that men and people in crisis can't solve for themselves?
Subtly, no. Not a society. Because as a society, who's part? No. I mean, you. I mean, listeners as individuals need to take responsibility. And it's not that you have to take responsibility. It's not fair to you to be responsible for someone else. But unless everyone who's listening to this podcast goes out and literally hugs a man, no one else is going to do it. Because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? You can't rely on society. We've been relying on society to fix the problem. It's not working. Society can't do shit.
So you're saying me?
Me?
Forget
Yes.
society. Don't wait for government to have some kind of intervention.
How's it working out?
Not great. I mean, the direction of travel as it relates to these sort of key issues like loneliness are only getting worse and worse. Suicidality seems to be getting worse and worse. Now you've got this young generation of women as well that are exploding in their suicidality.
Yes.
Young women. I think it's the fastest growing group at the moment, if my stats are correct there.
Yeah, so we have one really interesting thing is that men and women are becoming more equal in many ways, but in unfortunate ways. So female suicidality is getting worse. We're also seeing like male body dysmorphia on the rise, and I suspect it's way worse than we realize. But I think that what we're starting to see is less of a discrepancy in gender-related health issues. So the things that used to be predominantly men are now women are catching up, which is a bad thing. And things that were predominantly women, now men are catching up. So body dysmorphia in men, addictions in women are on the rise. So things are getting worse.
What explains that? Specifically the suicidality in young women. I hear social media is a leading cause of that, but
yeah, so I think if we look at it, it's not just social media. So I think what's happened is that the fundamental day of a man and a woman, I believe, I don't know if this is factually correct, is getting closer and closer. So like, women are working now, men are working now, like dating is hard, like being on Tinder sucks if you're a dude or a woman for different reasons. We have a lot of technological influence, so like everyone's kind of getting screwed and we're all kind of getting screwed together. And just because things are getting bad or worse for men and men are in crisis has no relation to the fact that women are struggling for a whole different set of reasons. So there's plenty of biases that I see as a psychiatrist. There's biases against men in psychiatry, there's biases against women in psychiatry. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is that we seem to think that it's like a pendulum, where it's like if we're biased against men, we can't also be biased against women. But I think both groups can suffer at the same time catastrophically.
and they are.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the role of social media. Your book is called How to Raise a Healthy Gamer. And when I think about gaming, I think some people think about it like holding a controller and being a character in a video game or shooting something, whatever. But many of these social media apps are almost indistinguishable from gaming in many respects. So the role of social media in our mental health in the modern world, good, bad, indifferent?
So bad right now. So let's understand something. So social media and technology is kind of like introducing an invasive species. So there's no checks and balances right now. So I don't think gaming is evil. So I struggle with video game addiction. I play video games with my kids now. So the main problem with social media and technology is that it's completely unregulated and we don't know how to fight against it. So what's happening right now is, especially if you look at social media, is that like it is affecting our brains and we're outgunned. So if you kind of like look at, for example, we're talking about masculinity, right? And what's my antidote to that? It's introspection. So if we sort of look at these yogic or meditative skills, as we train ourselves in these skills, we will become impervious to the negative effects of technology. The problem is that these things are so good at literally shaping our thoughts. So as an example, if we look at social media, body dysmorphia and insecurity about the way that we feel about ourselves can lead to things like suicidality. Okay, so as we look at, all these pretty people on social media, you look at all these people who are not normal, right? So social media will show you the prettiest people. And so as I see pretty face after pretty face after pretty face, I start to think that that is normal. My brain makes this calculation, and then I start to feel ugly. So this results in body dysmorphia. So if we sort of look at that, the more we see pretty things, the more that we have FOMO, because everyone is having fun, right? If I log on to Facebook or Instagram, this person is having a birthday party, this person is having, every time I log on, everyone is having a blast. But this is 365 people who each have one birthday party. I get one birthday party a year, but anytime I look at the social media, it seems like everyone is always having fun. It's not everyone. It's just one person is having fun today, one person is having fun tomorrow. Everyone just gets one birthday a year. But when we see it, we see everyone's having fun and I'm not having fun. So this makes us feel bad about ourselves. So what is the antidote to that? So in the yogic tradition, we have this concept of a ahamkara or ego. So you have particular meditative practices that help you dissolve your ego. And essentially what social media does is amplifies our ego, makes us feel really bad about ourselves. Remember that one of the key hallmarks is comparison of ego. So social media induces a lot of comparison. So as we train our mind, we will become free from those problems. So if I learn how to dissolve my ego, then social media is not a problem.
Easier said than done.
Absolutely.
You even said that you've still got an ego.
I'm 100%.
And you've done all this practice and you've still got an ego.
Yeah.
Have you dissolved it at all?
Oh, absolutely. So I mean, it's way smaller than it used to be, but even to say that I have completely dissolved my ego is an egotistical statement. So this is a battle that I will never win, and I've just accepted that, right? So there's no way to win. I'm not going to become enlightened in this day and age. So I'm just going to do the best that I can, and I'll never succeed. It's okay.
There's so many shocking stats that kind of links to two things we've talked about here around connection and relationships. I think we all know intuitively now, especially with all the research and data that's come out, how important relationships are for mental health. Gaming, social media, the digital world, the Vision Pro. I bought one yesterday. Virtual reality, augmented reality. As we head more towards these digital worlds, are you concerned at all that we're losing sight of connection? I sit that in comparison or alongside the stats that we know about sexlessness, people having less sex, marriages seeming to get worse and worse and more difficult. The direction of travel here doesn't feel like it's very optimistic.
Yeah, it's not.
And what do we do about that? Do you think we just become gurus and leave the digital world and the Western world and try and escape and take our kids with us? I had someone talk to me about that idea.
No, so I don't think so, right? So my book is how to raise a healthy game. What I believe is that these things are only evil if we don't know how to deal with them. So what's happened is human beings have created fire for the first time, but we don't know how to control fire. So we don't need to run away from technology. We just need to get better at dealing with it. And getting better at dealing with it is everything from maybe government regulation or whatever to even training our personal sense of self. So if you sort of look at why are relationships decaying, it's for a number of reasons. The first is that, see, human relationships evolutionarily were predicated on the fact that humans needed each other for survival. So fundamentally what has always bound human beings together is I need you and you need me, otherwise we're not going to survive. But what's happening in the world today is we no longer need each other for survival. So I never even need to leave my house. I can order groceries, I can order food, I can work from home, I can literally stay in my home or in my room. And I never need to walk out of the house, I never need to interact with someone. So once you remove necessity from the equation as to why human beings form relationships, so we're seeing a decay in relationships because we no longer need each other, right? So women no longer need men. You can have an independent life. As a man, you no longer need a woman. You can get a fleshlight if you want to. You can have an AI girlfriend. You have pornography. We don't need each other. And yet the human mind is the only organ of the body that in order for it to be healthy, it requires another human being. So we don't need, our heart can be healthy without another human. Kidneys can be healthy, liver can be healthy. Our whole body can be healthy except for the brain and except for the mind. We need someone else to be mentally healthy. So now what we're going to have to do as a society is evolve. We're going to have to start to realize that we don't need relationships anymore in order to survive. But without them, we will all suffer. And so what we need to do is evolve as humans, and I think part of that is learning some of these yogic and meditation skills so that we can resist the influences, the negative influences of technology. But that also means prioritizing relationships even when we don't need to.
Do you think they should teach these skills in school, the yoga?
100%.
Could be a good time to intervene, wouldn't it?
Yes. 100%. And I've taught these kids, these skills to kids. And it's amazing how quickly they pick it up. It's hard for me and you to learn because we're already formed. But just like a language, if you teach it to a child, I'll teach, I taught infants to meditate, my own children. I taught them to meditate when they were 2.
What does that mean? What are these skills? If you were trying to teach a grown-up like me, where would you begin?
So I'll tell you where I began with my kids.
Please, yeah.
So let's understand what meditation is. So meditation is controlling the attention of your mind. So if I tell my mind to focus on this, it's going to focus on this. So if we look at meditation, there are a couple of key steps. The first is ignoring impulses. So if I tell my mind to focus on this object, it will have an impulse to focus on something else. So we have to train the mind to stop thinking about other things. So I teach this to my 4-year-old in a very fun way. I tell her to lay down on the ground, and we play this game called Sniffer Gobbler, where I'm a monster called the Sniffer Gobbler. She has to be perfectly still. So the Sniffer Gobbler is going to try to get her to move, and if she moves, then she gets gobbled. So this becomes a game. So I'm kind of trying to get her to move. I'm tickling her a little bit. I'm sniffing or whatever. I'm playing some kind of game with her. And she's being perfectly rigid because it's part of the game. So what's going on in her brain in this moment? As I tickle her, there's an impulse. Her whole body is sending nervous signals to the brain. Let's move. Let's shift. Let's do something. Let's do something. But her frontal lobes in that moment are learning to restrain her mind and literally control her impulses. So this is step number 1: is stop your impulses. You can learn this very simply by, for example, I would recommend for someone like you a practice called Trataka. So Trataka is fixed point gazing. So you take a candle and you gaze at the candle without blinking. So the first 10 seconds will be easy, but then you'll start to get signals. Let's blink, let's blink, let's blink, let's blink. It's going to start to burn, they're going to start to tear up. You probably won't get hurt, don't worry about it, it's safe practice. Because then your eyes will start to water and they'll lubricate, which is usually what our eyelids need to do. And so you'll start to have tears, but then you focus your mind. And now what you're literally doing is controlling your impulses, you're restraining your impulses. So that's the first step of meditation, is to not let your mind wander into 1,000 different things. Now, if you do this one practice, which is not even real meditation, your life will be transformed. So you will literally, it's like lifting weights for self-control. So now you're sitting down to eat a meal, 11 p.m. rolls around, you have those cravings, but if you've done Trataka, your frontal lobes will be strengthened. And as your frontal lobes become strengthened, you are able to resist your impulses. You will gain control over yourself. That's step 1. Just resist your impulses. This is usually why meditation practices involve sitting and focusing and like not moving. The second step is a little bit different. There's a difference between avoiding distraction and then pushing my mind to focus on different things. So then, for example, what I'll do with my daughter is I'll tell her to chant Om and maximize the feeling of vibration in your chest. So now what she's doing is she's attuned to her body, she's chanting Om, and then she's trying to maximize the vibration. So in this moment, she's using something to focus the attention of her mind, because her mind is fully on the chest and feeling that vibration. And then she's kind of experimenting a little bit, but she's really tuned in. And that trains our mind to focus on one thing. So these are steps number 1 and 2. So the first thing you've got to do is avoid impulses and distractions. And the second thing is teach your mind how to sit on one thing and don't go anywhere else. That's step 1 and 2, and then you'll be ready for meditation.
And what is meditation?
So the word meditation in English has 3 Sanskrit words that get translated into meditation. Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi. So dharana is technically a focusing technique. It's something that you do. So I can tell you gaze at a candle flame without blinking. This is a dharana. It is a focusing technique. This is what's confusing for a lot of people. The second word for meditation is dhyan. So dhyan is not something you can do. It's a state of mind. So I'll explain this very simply. Do you know how to go to sleep?
Me, no. I mean, when I go to bed and I lay down and then I usually put something on so I can listen to it as I fall asleep.
Is that how I sleep?
No.
How should I sleep? Pretend I don't know how to sleep. Can you teach me how to sleep?
Go to the bedroom.
Okay. Done that.
Make sure it's nice and cold.
Okay.
Lay there in the bed and close your eyes
Okay.
and wish for the best.
So I laid there and I closed my eyes. I have a blanket over me. It's cold and I'm not asleep yet. What am I doing wrong? What do I need to do to go to sleep?
Maybe you're not tired enough.
Have you slept before?
Yeah.
Have you done it a lot?
Yeah.
But you can't tell me how to do it.
Not really, no.
Absolutely. So sleep is a state of consciousness. So going to bed is something that you do, and then sleep happens to you. This is the biggest misunderstanding about meditation. Everyone's focused on meditation techniques. These are dharanas. If you are in a dharana, as you gaze at the candle for an extended period of time, your mind will enter a state of consciousness in the same way that you enter sleep, but you can't control it. You can't do it, you can't evoke it. You just have to create the right environment, and then the consciousness will trigger. The closest thing that many people experience is the flow state. But even in the flow state, there is mental activity. So the flow state is like the early stage of meditation. And then after you enter dhyan, which is a state of consciousness which is of no mind. So you have awareness, but you have no thoughts, no emotions. You're just simply aware. The best example of this that some people have experienced, a couple of things. One is orgasm. The moment of orgasm is one where you have no thoughts. Thoughts come afterward. Thoughts come before. But in that moment of orgasm, you are aware, you are present, you are blissful, but you have no thoughts or no mental activity. Sometimes also like looking at the sun, like watching a sunset, walking along the beach. There's some moments where you're present, you're not really thinking about anything, but you're not asleep, you're not daydreaming. This is what dhyan is. This is the second stage of meditation. After you sit in dhyan for a while, then you will attain something called samadhi. So these are the transcendental states of meditation. This is the kind of stuff that psychedelics does to you. So when you enter these samadhi states, this is when you start to get transformed and all this weird stuff that's very hard to describe. So I would say that meditation is these three things. It's a focusing technique, followed by a state of consciousness that, fingers crossed, get induced. And once you're in that state, then you can kind of start climbing.
And what impact has it had on your life?
Transformative, completely changed my life. I mean, I used to be a 25-year-old kid with nothing to show for it, and now, arguably, I'm successful. Right? So I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, I have a clinical practice, I'm a dad, I'm a content creator, and it's like I'm the same kid that was failing out of college. Like I haven't changed. The only difference between the loser and the successful person, which neither of those are true, by the way, those are both manifestations of ego. I'm neither a loser nor am I successful. These are external trappings. But fundamentally, I'm the same person that I've always been. And the only difference is that meditation taught me how to control this thing. It's like when you're living life, it's like you're playing a video game and the controller is unplugged. So the character on the screen does whatever the fuck it wants to. And you're trying to send it signals, but it's not listening to you. So what meditation is the process of plugging in your controller so that you start controlling the instrument of your life. You understand how your body works, you understand how your mind works, you understand where your desires come from, you understand how to conquer them, you understand what your ego is, you understand all of these kinds of things. And meditation is what helped me do that.
The thing with meditation, the sort of instant rebuttal is I tried it and it didn't work, or I tried it and I can't stop myself from thinking about things. That's like what I hear all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't meditate. I tried it. My brain's too busy.
Okay, great. So let's rebut those. As I've helped at least 1,000 people overcome this. So let's understand a couple of fundamentals. See, if you've tried meditation, it didn't work for you, it's not your problem, and it's not that meditation doesn't work for you. It's that you had a crappy teacher. So if we understand, okay, like this is something that, how do people learn how to meditate?
They hear a podcast like this, and then they go sit in their room at some point, and then they close their eyes and try and think of nothing, and it doesn't work, so they stop.
Okay, great. So like, who is their teacher?
The Diary of a CEO.
Right? But this is what I mean. So the quality of meditation teaching is degraded so profoundly. Everyone has mindfulness apps. What's your teacher? It's an app.
Yeah.
So if I were to say like, okay, like, you know, Stephen, you're a pretty crappy surgeon, but you've never gone to medical school. How would you expect to ever be a decent surgeon unless you literally had people teach you? So there are a couple of things that I learned how to meditate because I had expert teachers. The reason that I teach meditation successfully is because I'm a decent teacher. I'm not even the best teacher out there. So a couple of things to understand about meditation. One is that there are 112 meditation techniques, one of which will work very naturally for every person on the planet. Okay, so the number one reason that people suck at meditation is because we're not teaching them the right kind of meditation. As a simple example, so I have patients with ADHD, and I teach them very successfully to meditate. Now, a lot of these patients, when they come to me, they say meditation doesn't work for me because I can't get my mind to slow down and focus on one thing. It always wanders. To which I say, that's great. No problem. We're going to teach you meditation that's going to feel so easy for you. So let me ask you this. If I've got a kid, okay, who's running around and I want my kid to sit still, how do I get the kid to sit still?
How do people typically do that?
Yeah,
They shout at the kid.
Okay, so the kid sits still for a little while, then what happens?
Runs off again.
Absolutely. So how do I get a kid to sit still? When does a child sit? it in some way. So like this is why I don't know if you've seen this, but in airports they'll have like these little play places. So the best way to get a child to sit down is to tell it to run. You run, go to the playground for an hour, and then what'll the child do? Naturally, I want to sit down. So when I'm teaching my patients with ADHD how to meditate, I don't tell them to slow down their mind. I tell them to move it as fast as you can. So I'll literally take my patients to a cafeteria, and we sit in the cafeteria, and I tell my patient, you have to pay attention to as many sounds as you can, as quickly as you can. I want you to hear every sound in the cafeteria. Don't miss a single one. Don't pay attention to what people are saying, but hear the words, hear this sound, hear this sound, hear this sound, hear this sound. So what I'm really telling their mind to do is run instead of sit still. Eventually what happens is they're paying attention to sound number 1, then sound number 2, sound number 3. Not fast enough. Faster. You need to listen to 10 sounds in 3 seconds. Go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. And eventually the mind gets tired. And then the mind naturally sits down. Easiest meditation in the world. Then they enter jhana. So what are they doing in dharana? They're paying attention to sound number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then eventually the mind will calm down. It'll get exhausted, and then they'll enter jhana. And then they've learned to meditate. So I think the reason that meditation doesn't work for people is because they haven't tried the right technique. So you look like a guy who exercises. You exercise?
Yeah.
How do you exercise?
Go to the gym and lift the weights.
Okay. What about running?
Yeah, sometimes.
Swimming?
No, can't swim.
Why not?
I think it's just a story I've told myself, but I just can't float.
Okay, great, right? So if all exercise was swimming, you would have concluded that exercise is not for me. But there are 1,000 ways to exercise because human beings are different. So you just have to find the right kind of exercise for you. And it's fun for you. People will look at you and say, I don't understand how you exercise. Oh my God, it's awful. I hate fitness. Swimming. I hate traffic. So learning how to meditate is not about doing one particular tradition. This is where there's a big problem in the world today, which is that most meditation teachers just know they're one tradition. And so if a student comes to them and they don't do it right, the teacher tells them you need to keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. I've seen very few meditation teachers say, you know what, I'm not the teacher for you. This is not the right app for you. You should go use this different app because based on your mind, this is what will suit your mind. We each have a cognitive fingerprint, and learning how to meditate very easily is about choosing the right meditation for your cognitive fingerprint.
And does meditation help us with these addictions we've been talking about? Social
100%.
media addictions, porn addictions, we talk about as well, gaming addictions.
I think I would go as far as to say that it conquers them all. So that's kind of a grandiose statement. But if we really look at what is an addiction is two things. It is a source of pleasure, and it is an antidote to pain. So anytime you look at any addiction, so opium, for example, gives me pleasure, and it also numbs out, it shuts off the functioning of my amygdala and my limbic system. Video games shut off my amygdala and my limbic system, make my negative emotions go away, and release dopamine. So we have dopamine release, and we have suppression of our negative emotional circuitry. All addictions do this. So if you sort of look at it, why do we fall into an addiction? It's because we become dependent on this dopamine surge, on giving into our wants, right? So our mind says, oh, I want this thing, and we can't control that impulse. When it wants something, I have to give it. I can't control it. I'm too weak. The other thing that happens is that anytime we have pain, we have to run away from it. But meditation is literally the process of training those two skills. So when I have a want, I learn to resist it. I want to scratch my nose, no scratching your nose. And what we sort of know from a neuroscience standpoint is that we know that meditation strengthens our frontal lobes. And weak frontal lobes are fertile ground for addictions. So we know that we literally strengthen the parts of the brain that will help resist addiction from the pleasure side. The other cool thing about meditation is that it makes us not impervious to pain, but we stop avoiding pain. So you asked me, like, am I nervous about how the book is going to go? No, if it crashes and burns, then I will be sad. So what? Right? So I'm going to be sad. Will I be sad forever? Well, that depends on whether I base my sense of identity on this one book. I'll be sad for some amount of time. And that sadness, by the way, is karmically what I bought when I wrote the book. And I think this is something that a lot of people miss. But the moment that I write the book, I open myself up to the pleasure of it being a success and the pain of it being a failure. Does that make sense? So if I really wanted to avoid the pain, the only solution is to not write the book in the first place. But that's not the way to live life. So meditation teaches us how to tolerate pain, how to accept pain. And then once you can accept pain, oh my God, your life becomes so much easier. And then something beautiful happens. Now I don't have to use the opiate. My day job is as an addiction psychiatrist. So I teach this stuff to people who are addicted to heroin, fentanyl, and video games and stuff like that. It works for all of them. Not all of them, most of them. And so meditation absolutely helps because it literally strengthens the parts of our brain that addictions prey on.
And these are all addictions, like food addictions, and porn addictions,
Absolutely.
and gaming addictions, and social media addictions.
So each addiction has a slightly different manifestation, but the core aspect of providing pleasure and taking away pain is true of all addictions.
What is the most popular addiction in your mind that the vast majority of society are currently prey to, but don't really realize? I mean, I'm reading through your book, I think phone addiction, which you talk about in chapter 7, is maybe the thing that none of us see as an addiction, but we're probably addicted. If I look at my screen time, I think,
Most
Jesus Christ.
popular, yeah, so I think phone addiction is really bad. I mean, in a weird way, I'd say this doesn't really qualify as addiction, but the biggest problem, I think, is our addiction to success, right? So if we sort of think about it, like, I don't know if that's kind of the context of it's just where my mind goes, but if we sort of think about it, everyone is using success as an antidote to their pain and a source of their pleasure. And so here we are chasing all of these things for success, for success, for success. But in terms of like technology or like from a psychiatric perspective, I think phone is probably at the top of the list.
I think I've been quite confused about something in my life, but just generally, because when I think about those young men that are struggling, or young women that are struggling, I often think what their life is lacking is a sense of purpose and ambition and something to strive for. This is kind of what we say. But now I'm kind of confused based on what you said, because is that what they're missing? Like, you see a kid, he's 22 years old, he's in his mum's basement, low self-esteem, playing video games all day, doesn't respect himself, low self-worth. In my head, I used to think, okay, what that kid needs is a big goal to strive for.
Fair enough. So, but let's pay attention to your specific language. So what that kid needs is purpose, ambition, and something to strive for. Are those three things the same?
No.
Right? So this is the big core of the problem. This is why things get muddled, and this is why people get confused. Because ambition is very different from purpose. They're like at opposite ends of the spectrum. If we look at it from a scientific perspective, the number one thing that correlates, or one of the two most popular, or two variables that correlate most with pornography addiction, is meaninglessness in life. So if you want to conquer your pornography addiction, you have to have a reason to not jerk off and watch porn all day. So you have to have a life that like makes it so that you just don't do that. Because what happens is if you have an empty life and your brain is kind of sitting there and it's like, okay, we're not doing anything anyway, so let me get some dopamine. Like, let's just do that. And that's how people become addicted to pornography.
Is there a correlation there between when people masturbate and what they're going through in their life?
Absolutely. So it's not even masturbation with pornography addiction, but what we find is that the more emotional, the more their amygdala and limbic system gets activated, the more pornography they will use. So the more negative emotion you experience, the more pornography you will watch.
Why? Because they want dopamine.
No, so this is where it avoids the pain. So pornography shuts off our experience of negative emotions. It's not even the pleasure, it's the avoidance of the negative emotions.
So if I'm really stressed and I'm going through a lot of shit work, I have a higher chance of masturbating that day.
Not even masturbation, watching pornography.
Okay.
So masturbation is what leads to the dopamine, but watching pornography will shut off the negative emotions. So I've worked with people who have pornography addiction, for example, that will have work on one screen, and they will literally have pornography open and playing on the second screen.
You're joking.
No, very common. So we don't talk about pornography addiction. So like, and the worse their life is, the more stress they have. That's when I'll ask them, when are the days that you have porn open on the second screen? And they'll say, the worse their stress gets, the worse their use gets.
So how do you help that person?
You teach them a couple of things. One is that you have to understand what the pain is, right? So, and then you teach them alternate emotional regulation skills. So if you teach them other ways to manage their emotions, they won't need the pornography. The reason that porn is so addictive is because from a biological perspective, we're so wired for sex that it is a very effective way to shut off our negative emotions. But if you can teach them how to manage their negative emotions, and the second thing that we do is we metabolize the source of your negative emotions. So if there is some kind of trauma in the loop, because we feel that trauma, the drive for the addiction will melt away.
Interesting. Have you dealt with a lot of people that have a pornography addiction?
Sure.
And the sort of common thread is that they all have some kind of early trauma. And I've read in your book as well that those people are typically exposed to pornography at a younger age.
Yes. So there's all kinds of stuff that happens. But yeah, usually people have, what I would say is they have unmetabolized emotions or a source of constant streaming of negative emotions.
Does it create shame
100%.
in those people? Is that one of the...
That's the problem, right? So as I become addicted to pornography, I feel ashamed of myself. And what's my antidote to shame, Stephen?
pornography?
There we go.
So that's the downward spiral. The
Yeah.
upward spiral looks like getting out of there. So I'm watching
So-
pornography, I do something, I think that's pornography.
Yeah, so oftentimes what the upward spiral looks like is when you feel shame, come and talk to me, right? So we're going to talk about what you feel ashamed of. You're going to vent that negative emotion. So we also know this is something that Freud discovered, is that experiencing emotion, even if it's not related to a real event, weakens the emotion. So what he sort of found is that if you can get someone to cry in your office as a psychotherapist, and they vent that emotion out, they feel lighter, they feel better, the emotional energy is left their body in some way. So that, and then we oftentimes will get to the source of their trauma, and we're going to metabolize that emotion that's really deep down there, and that's kind of like, it's kind of like an oil well that's just pumping up this black stuff. So we shut off the oil well, we teach them alternative emotional regulation skills, and we work on building a life that is worth living.
What is one example from your practice where someone has gone from really zero to a remarkable place? Is there a case study that comes to mind where you go, oh my god, that is proof that any transformation is possible?
Sure. So there's a privacy concern. So I'm happy to be a little bit general here, but so I had someone who was started using opiates in their teenage years, and at the age of 32 went back to school, and has developed a career and became a best-selling author by the age of 36. So in the 4 years that we worked together, they got to writing, which is what they always wanted to do, published a book, and the book was very, very successful. And then they actually had a separate career on top of that.
Chapter 5, the first conversation. The hardest thing about talking to someone about an addiction they have is that the first conversation has to go without it affecting their gaming addiction in this case. That first conversation is the most difficult often.
Yeah, so it's not just for addiction. So if we sort of understand, the first conversation that you have with someone about something that they're not doing well in their life, and this relates to men or incels or whatever, you have to approach that non-judgmentally. So if you want to connect with someone, and a big part of what I believe about addiction, and I will not believe it, this is true, is that you can't cure an addiction with someone else. So they have to want to stop. So I've had people, I used to work at 2 rehabs, these are 30-day rehabs, where people get forced to rehab them. The person themselves has to want to stop the addiction, conquer the addiction, quit the addiction, in order for it to be successful. So how do you convince that, okay, this is a problem, and you need to stop this? You can't convince them. But the best that you can do is approach them non-judgmentally, right? So help me understand what is going on. Help me understand why you use this thing. You can have judgments in your mind, that's okay, but be open-minded and be compassionate. Recognize that if this person is doing something, they are doing it for a reason. If their brain did not get more benefit than harm out of it, then their brain would not be doing it.
On that first conversation, and also that moment of sort of change where they realize that they want to make a change in their life, and it's, enough is enough. People often refer to that as the rock bottom. Is it true that people need to... Because I spoke to a few people about this, whether we need to get to a rock bottom in order to make those big changes in our lives, or if there's a way to not get to rock bottom before we decide to make the change.
So I'll give you an answer from one of my patients who I think knows this better than I do. See, when you hit rock bottom, you can always pull out a jackhammer and break down but you can easily, I mean, I'm sure I can know this, right? So a lot of people, for them, it is a rock bottom. But I think, really, I trust my patients that it's just as far down as you go before you turn around, and that's your lowest point.
We can all think of people in our lives that we want to help change. And I guess in what I just said is part of the problem, because we want to intervene in their lives and create change for them. But we sometimes watch them self-sabotaging and then telling us they have this goal, they want to be this or that or the other, but then their behavior continues to follow a similar pattern where they continue to self-sabotage. And as bystanders, sometimes we try and intervene, we try and help them in various ways. I'll pay for your therapist, I'll take care of your gym membership, whatever. What should we be doing as bystanders of someone who's saying they want to change but is showing no sign?
Great question. So what we should do is not be bystanders, but also not quite pay for therapy. So this is something that's very important. So I once had a very brilliant teacher at Massachusetts General Hospital who told me that as a doctor, you should never go the extra mile for a patient. And I was kind of confused by that, right? Because I was taught that, oh my God, like, as a doctor, you should sacrifice, you should go the extra mile. And he said the extra mile is a mile too far. So anything that someone can do for themselves, you should not do for them. So what I sort of really found is that there's a really interesting case of a patient that I had that had a child with HIV. So this was when HIV was first discovered. They got diagnosed as an infant, so they had a perinatal HIV exposure. And so this was when we were really discovering HIV, and so everyone bent over backwards for this kid. Because this is a 7-year-old kid with HIV. So if they ever did anything wrong, it's not their fault the kid has HIV. They'd come late to appointments, they wouldn't do their homework. Oh, there's always people bending over backwards to help this person, help this person, help this person. So I was this person's doctor when they were in their late 20s. And I was stunned by how incapable they are. They can't do even the most basic things like fill out an application for a particular thing that they needed. They needed the nursing staff to sit with them and fill out the application. Because what we had done is engendered some degree of helplessness. So the biggest mistake that a lot of parents make is that they accept responsibility for their kids. And if we love someone who has an addiction, we want to protect them from the consequences of addiction. So we actually step up and we do more. The problem is that the moment that you start doing more, they will start doing less. So if you look at something as simple as, let's say you've got a roommate, and there's dishes in the sink. The more you take responsibility for the dishes, what is your roommate going to do? They're going to do them less. The same is true. So what I sort of find is that instead of, because we're so afraid, oh my God, like if I don't help them with this, if I don't pay for your therapy, then you're going to be fucked. You're so afraid, and so who's taking responsibility for it? You are. Let them ask you to pay. Let them come to you and say, you know what, I really want to conquer this. I found someone, but I can't afford it. Will you help me? The outcomes that you see will be drastically different. In my own practice, sometimes I charge a lot of money. And what I have found, 70% of my practice at one point was free. What I found is the number of people who no-show for their appointments, which I'm giving them a big break, the more of a break I give them, and if they're free, they show up the least. If someone has skin in the game, they will actually do it. So my patients who are actually paying for my services, they're the ones who always show up. So what we want to do is we want to start by asking these people, hey, tell me how you feel about your addiction, or not addiction, just tell me what's going on with your game, right? Like, how do you feel about your life? Like, help me understand what's going on. Start by just understanding the person. And if you do that, everyone has ambivalence. That means internal conflict. There's a part of them that wants to quit, and there's a part of them that doesn't want to quit. The problem is that anytime we see a flash of them wanting to get better, what do? Yay, let's do it. And then what happens? We get that resistance from that. So if I'm like, I come to Steve and I'm like, hey man, I'm thinking about going to the gym. What do you say?
Yeah, come on, come with me.
Right? And then what do people do when you say that?
They don't come.
Yeah,
Way.
right? So what's kind of interesting, so what I do as a psychiatrist is like, hey, you know, you're just thinking about going to the gym, but like, you really need to.
Oh, really? You push back.
Yeah, right? So whatever side you take, they're going to take the opposite side.
Why do you do that?
Because that's what the science tells us. So there's a technique called motivational interviewing. And anytime you're dealing with something called ambivalence, which is internal conflict, if you push them in one way, they're not moving in the opposite way. I'm not saying that you can't encourage them, but let them take the lead. That's the big difference.
Let it be their motivation.
Let it be their motivation. Anytime they move in the right direction, you want to support that, but don't ever push them. I do for my patients, the better that they end up doing.
Last question. You talk about the 25% rule. What is the 25% rule, and how does one apply it?
So, see, we all think about goals, where I want to be. Now, there's a really tricky problem in our brain. So if I have a goal that I want to be a millionaire, and I work today and I earn $10, how does my brain interpret that? It looks at the effort that I put in and says $10 is nowhere near my goal, and that actually tanks my motivation because it looks at the situation and says, I have not moved sufficiently close to my goal. So the bigger our goal is, the harder it is for our brain to get on board with doing it. So the 25% rule is take anything that you want to accomplish and cut it in half. And then cut it in half again. And this should be your first goal. At the minimum, you can even go smaller than that. 12.5. There's no amount that is too small. But generally speaking, if you really look at it, the more ambitious your goals are, the harder they will be to achieve. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but you can still achieve it. When I was 18 years old, I wanted to become a doctor. When I gave up on the goal, I focused on the task. So if you really look at how you accomplish great things, not by wanting to, I can see the bottom of Mount Everest and look at the top and I can say, I want to climb to the top of Mount Everest. Or I can not even look at the top of Mount Everest. Whether I'm looking at the top, it's the same. So it's really interesting because everyone is so focused on goals. What I've sort of learned as a psychiatrist and even in my own life is like, focus on today. Focus on doing something today. Be super careful about setting a big goal. Because then even if you set a huge goal and you do 50% of it, you'll feel like, oh my God, like I didn't accomplish my goal. And even 50% progress will feel like a failure because you didn't hit your goal. Right? This is really weird the way that our motivation system works. Cut your goal in half and then cut it in half again and focus on it.
It makes sense. It's what the performance director, David Brailsford, talked to me about many years ago. He said that he used to ban the athletes from thinking about the podium and just focus them on their pedal strokes on their bikes, and that team went on to become the greatest cycling team of all time, pretty much, from being down and out. And I always wondered why he still banned them thinking about the medals and stuff like that, because it would form as a distraction from today's performance. But it's difficult to do, so okay, I'll stop setting goals.
Set them 25% or set them with awareness.
No, I do anyway. To be honest, I don't set big goals in my life. I find it really difficult when people ask me, what's your 5-year or your 10-year plan? You feel like you're bullshitting because the answer in reality is I'm doing my very, very best every day.
Exactly. Right. So I agree with that 100% because what more do you do? Like setting a 10-year goal doesn't, I mean, we can sort of think that it makes us work harder and it can in some ways, but it's not the ideal way.
It's getting confused today and cause a lot of procrastination and confusion about what I should be doing today because my goal is 10 million in 5 years.
Absolutely.
Doing a course online today doesn't feel like
So if you have a 10-year plan, you can afford to waste today. And you can afford to waste tomorrow because you have so much time.
Exactly, and that's not useful. If you've seen my most recent post on LinkedIn, you probably have seen that I'm on a bit of a hiring spree at the moment across my company, Flight Crew, trying to find the world's best talent. And throughout these years of building these businesses, my first port of call for hiring has always been LinkedIn Jobs, who are a proud sponsor of this podcast. This is because of 2 reasons. Number 1, LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals and quality candidates 24 hours knowing who they're going to be leaving it for.
Okay.
And the question that's been left for you, if you could write one more book and that book was 1 page long and it was the last message that you could send to the world and your family, what would you use that page to say?
So I can tell you what I would want it to say, but I think writing it in 1 page would be very difficult. Like I would do it, but so I've thought about this that if I die tomorrow, I basically only have 1 regret about life. I only have 1 thing that I want to accomplish, which is that I'm trying very hard to help a lot of people in the world, and the 1 regret that I would have if I died tomorrow is that I would not have taught my children what I teach the rest of the world. So I've even thought about this, that if I got diagnosed with cancer and I had 1 year to live, how would I spend that year? I would write a book for my kids that distills everything that I've learned about sort of motivation, neuroscience, spirituality. It's all the same thing. It's all the same truths. The yogis learned this stuff, and they were using the same brains that we learned. So they discovered all the principles of neuroscience I would put on that one page, probably one page is how many lines? 16 lines? 18 lines? 20 lines maybe? So I'd probably write 20 sutras that are like the core of what I've learned. And that may be things like, like one of the sentences will be like, what is the ego? The ego is that which compares in the sense of self. How does one... Introspection is the way to shed yourself of like worldly expectations. Like once you start to know yourself, you won't look to the outside world to tell you what you should be. And as long as you're telling the outside world, as long as you're listening to the outside world to tell you who you should be, you'll never be happy. Right? So some of this stuff, it would be something like that. That's probably what I would do. I try to distill everything that I've learned into 20 lines. I was hoping that I can do it in a book, but one page would be tough.
I'm curious about what some of those other lines would be. So you talked about introspection, about ego.
Yeah, so I'd probably include one line about glishta and one line about vasana. So glishta is coloring. So the realization that most of what you experience in life doesn't come from the outside world. It comes from what your mind adds to the equation. So I'll give you an example. So if I met you for the first time and I called you a loser, I said, Stephen, you're a loser. The impact of that, these are just words. But whether that hurts you or doesn't hurt you is based on the interpretation of your mind. So another good example is, let's say I'm like talking to a girl and I text her and she doesn't text me back. There are 1,000 reasons why she may not text me back in 10 minutes. But it is what my mind adds to the reality of the world that actually fucks me the most. And most people don't realize this. They think that, oh, this person dislikes me and this thing is going wrong and this thing is going... No, it's not actually like that. It is your mind that is actually coloring all of your experiences. So there'd be one sentence on Glishta, one sentence on Vasana. An understanding of ego, an understanding of where desires come from, how to be happy. This whole idea that chasing an external thing for happiness will not ever achieve it in a lasting way.
You got 2 kids.
Yeah.
What would be the last thing you ever say to them?
Probably, I'm sorry I have to go. And I wish I had more time with you. That's probably what I would say. And then, I love you. And, I may be gone in this body, but I'll be around. And we'll meet again. It's interesting because, when you meditate, we have this idea that we only live this life. And that's because of the conditioning of our brain. And there are lots of studies. There's a guy at the University of Virginia who's done past lives. And I've even done past lives with my patients. And when I was meditating, I realized one day that in a past life, it's not completely insane, but I've done that. What you're hearing now is not a hypothetical. I've lost a child before. I've been a mother before. It takes some time to figure this out. And when you meditate, you start to discover things about yourself. And I have experienced a sense of loss in me that I've lost a child. This is not hypothetical. I know what it's like to lose a child. And it's happened to me before, and I still carry that hurt with me from a past life. So when you ask me this hypothetical, this is not a hypothetical for me. The trauma that I've experienced is not in this life. So I'm lucky that so far it hasn't happened. I hope it doesn't happen. I've chosen to be my kids. The same way that we talked about the moment that I write the book is the moment that I open myself up to the success of the book or disappointment. The moment that I choose to love my kids, I open myself up to the hurt of losing because I could lose. And so that's one question that I think I've answered before. This is the first person that's ever asked me that. I can feel the hurt, I can feel the loss. And just in my own experience, meditation or instruction from the neurons in my brain. But just what I've learned, I think it's like I've been there before and it's very painful. And I still carry that pain with me.
Do you think that's some kind of generational trauma? Or do you believe that was you in another life?
Well, same thing. So I think now we go from studies of inheritance that these human beings, we actually all inherit memories. So I think it's really interesting because even if you look at your aversion to snakes, how do you have a fear of snakes? Even the first time you see a snake, you'll be scared of it. So we know scientifically that we inherit memories that are not our own. So now intellectual or philosophical, but if inherited memory wasn't you, I don't know. I mean, it's part of your DNA. It's part of your genetic expression. Would you consider that part of you or not? I think most people would consider your DNA part of you. So I think, yeah, we even have scientific evidence of that you could argue is sort of a mechanism through which we inherit memory in the past, for sure. Whether it's more likely or not is up for debate.
My girlfriend said this to me. She's talked about trauma that she feels like come from a past life. It's very difficult to believe. Very difficult to believe. But my girlfriend always seems to be right about everything. I eventually come to learn through lots of research that what she's saying isn't crazy. And she's gone very, very emotional at times about things that she thinks she's tapped into from her past life through meditation. She's a breathwork practitioner. She's up in Costa Rica now doing some retreats and stuff. It's so interesting. I'd love to learn a lot more about that. But for now, Dr. K, thank you so much for so much. You're one of the most engaging people I've ever spoken to in my life because you're so deeply passionate about the things that you speak about. And your book is about much more than gaming. The book is called How to Raise a Healthy Gamer, but it's about everything. It's about addiction, it's about our mind, it's about our relationships with both the technology that we have and each other. And then at the top of the book it says, end the power struggles, break bad screen habits, and transform your relationship with your kids. But it's much more than just about kids. It's about all our relationships with all things and all people fundamentally, because it's about the human mind, and that's why it's so incredibly important. And if nobody has discovered you online before, I would highly recommend they go and check out your YouTube channel because you manage to distill some complex things, highly engaging, science-based advice, and it's a remarkable one of the most effective communicators I've ever encountered.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's been awesome being here. I feel privileged to be a tiny slice of your life because I can see you're such an amazing dude. Like, I'm very excited that you exist in the world today, and I get to see what you continue doing.
Thank you. The key to growing a business is making sure that it's scalable, and this comes with integrating into the right platforms early in the game to support your growth. A platform that's helped me and my team do this is Shopify, who I'm sure you know by now because they do sponsor this podcast. Shopify is a commerce platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. We recently launched our second version of direct SEO competition cards on Shopify, which would not have been possible without Shopify. When I started podcasting, an online store was the furthest thing from my mind. But now, thanks to how simple it is to use the platform, it's made this whole process so unbelievably easy. It's actually the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. If you guys haven't tried Shopify, your business owners, go and try it now because you can sign up for a $1 per month trial period just by heading to shopify.com/Bartlett. You can get started on $1.